Welcome to Chapter 9. Developing consistency in top leadership is really critical for the success of Canadian companies. So, in this chapter, we'll introduce you to the concept of management and we'll take a focus on looking at the first function of the manager, which is planning. We'll take a look at the role of the manager throughout this chapter and the next couple of chapters in ensuring that the critical success factors of any company are met. Managers go through a process of four key functions. The first is planning, which will be the subject of this chapter. The second is leading or motivating our employees. The third is organizing the resources in the firm to ensure that the critical success factors will be satisfied. And the fourth is a monitoring or controlling function. So the concept of management is tying together all the other pieces of the puzzle to get a successful business to ensure that we meet the critical success factors. So in this chapter, we'll take a look at the difference between management and leadership. We'll talk about four types of planning. We'll talk about the primary responsibilities of managers in the organizational activities, and describe how leadership styles can influence the corporate culture. And we'll talk about those different leadership styles. We'll examine a little bit about the control function of management as well. We'll summarize the different roles that managers take on and identify the skills that managers require to ensure success of the organization. And of course, we'll conclude the chapter with looking at some of the trends that will affect management going forward. It's important to understand the differences between management and leadership. Throughout my career, I've worked for many managers, but very few leaders. And believe me, working for a true leader is much nicer as an employee than working for a true manager. So let's take a look at the differences between management and being a true leader. So management really is the process of guiding the development, maintenance, and allocation of resources to attain organizational goals. They're the people responsible for developing and carrying out the management process that we'll take a look at in the next slide. Versus leaders are or leadership is a relationship that's developed between the leader and the employees or the followers who want real changes and outcomes that reflect their shared purpose. So managers and leaders are not inherently the same people. Good managers have strong leadership skills. In some organizations, perhaps where you work, you might have a manager, but somebody else actually might be the true leader for your team. There's a little quote in your textbook on page 219 that highlights, and I like it because it highlights quite simply the differences between a manager and a leader. It says the manager drives group members where the leader coaches them. The manager depends on authority and the leader on goodwill. The manager inspires fear, whereas a leader inspires enthusiasm. The manager says I, the leader says we. The manager assigns the task, and the leader sets the pace. The manager says get there on time, and the leader says gets the team there ahead of time. The manager fixes the blame for any breakdowns, whereas a leader fixes the breakdown. Manager knows how it's done. The leader shows how it is done. The manager makes work drudgery, and the leader makes it a game. The manager says go, and the leader says, let's go. So quite a difference between true managers versus leadership. A couple of terms that you should be familiar with when talking about management and leadership. First is authority, which is the right to make decisions. And managers are given various levels of authority, which allows them to make decisions for an organization. Responsibility includes the assignment of task. They are the ones who are responsible for completing specific tasks in an organization. So managers will assign responsibility versus accountability, which is taking the task and accepting the consequences, accepting the success, or alternatively accepting the failure of a task. Both managers and leaders are aiming for the same goal, which is to ensure the success of the organization, while at the same time using resources very efficiently. And efficiency is using the least amount of resources to accomplish the goals. And managers and leaders both want to be effective, and that's the ability to achieve the final goal or to produce the desired results. So in the managerial process, it's a very dynamic process that starts and is ongoing over and over and over. It really never stops. A very dynamic process, and into today's world, which is changing very quickly, it's important for any managers or leaders to be able to respond quickly to changes in the organization or in the business environment. So the cycle of the managerial process starts with anticipating potential problems or opportunities and designing plans to deal with them. Then coordinating the resources to ensure that the critical success factors of the organization are met. Guiding personnel through the implementation of the to meet the goals of the organization, and then of course reviewing results and making any changes and starting the cycle all over again. And that managerial process typically is looked at by defining 4 primary activities of managers. The first is planning, and we'll focus on planning in this chapter. The planning really sets the objectives, states the mission, looks at the different alternatives, determines what resources are needed, and creates strategies to meet the objectives that have been defined. Organizing is the responsibility of managers to design the job, specify the various tasks that need to complete, creating the structure for the organization. That may mean creating defining different line positions and staff positions, and we'll talk about those later in the course. Coordination of all the work activities, things like setting policies, procedures, and allocating and managing the resources. Efficiency, so we can be effective at meeting our goals of the organization. The third primary function of managers is motivating. And motivating is really leading and motivating our employees to ensure that the goals of the organization are met, communicating with employees, resolving conflicts, and helping employees through the change process. And controlling is an essential managerial function which involves the setting of objectives, measuring performance, comparing those performance to standards or the objectives or targets that have been set, and then taking any necessary actions to improve, and is an ongoing process through the organization. And by effectively coordinating these 4 managerial tasks should lead to organizational efficiency and effectiveness, and meeting the ultimate mission and objectives and strategies that have been set forth for the corporation or for the business. So let's take a look at the first of the four managerial functions, which is planning. And planning is the process of deciding what needs to be done in order to achieve the objectives of the organization, as well as identifying when and how it will be done, as well as who will be responsible for getting those plans done. There's typically four types of planning that is completed in organizations, and each of those levels of planning are done by different levels of management. For instance, strategic planning is typically some longer term planning, 1 to 5 years or even longer. And these are really broad goals for the organization. And it involves determining what resources are going to need to accomplish those goals. So, for instance, establishing the mission statement, long-term goals, the vision of the organization. And it's really the responsibility of senior management, the top management, the CEO, the president, perhaps division heads of the company. So remember, the vision statement is that clear, concise picture of the company's future direction in terms of its values, in terms of its purpose. That's really used to guide and inspire the goals of the company. And the vision is really stated or formalized in that mission statement, which is the document that states the purpose of the organization and the reason for its existence. So strategic planning is very broad and a general type of planning done by top levels in the organization. Tactical planning begins the implementation of those strategic plans. So they have a shorter time frame, typically a year or less, and they have more specific objectives. The tactical plans are typically done by middle management, and it's really involved in establishing mid-range goals for the organization that are consistent with the strategic direction of the company. So tactical planning must be consistent with the strategic plan set forth by upper levels of management. The third level of planning is something that's called operational planning. And it is much more specific and short-term and concrete. So it creates specific standards, policies, methods, policies, and procedures that are used in the various functional areas of the organization. And operational objectives are more current, they're narrow, they're really resource focused, and are really designed to help guide and control the implementation of the tactical plans in the company. Operational controls or operational planning is typically done by supervisory management. So these are the frontline supervisors in the organization, and it might include setting production quotas for a day or a month, and ensuring that those goals are being met. The fourth type of planning is typically done by top and middle management, and it's something that's called contingency planning. And contingency planning is the ability to act to unforeseen changes within the organization. So there are plans that identify different courses of action for unusual or crisis situations. And when an emergency happens, top and middle management must have some plans in place to be able to respond to those changes and those unforeseen events that happen. For instance, if all of a sudden there's a major labor dispute, what are the contingency plans that are going to be developed by the corporation? What happens if there's a fire and the plant is shut down? What are the contingency plans for the organization? So they're very broad plans, yet they have to be detailed. There has to be sufficient information in the plan to be able to respond quickly to the unforeseen event. A second key function of managers is organizing. And organizing really is the process of coordinating and allocating all of the resources of the company to ensure that the organization is effective in carrying out its plans. So the organizational function includes developing a structure for the various people in the organization, the different positions in the organization, as well as the activities in the company. So they accomplish this by dividing up the tasks, something we call division of labor, grouping similar jobs and employees together, something that's called departmentalization, and assigning both the authority and responsibilities for the various tasks, which is the delegation function of the within the organizational framework. In Chapter 10, we're going to take a much more detailed look at each of those functions and different ways that managers can go about organizing the resources of the organization to ensure that it is meeting its critical success factors. One of the things, though, when it comes to the understanding the organizational function is understanding the managerial pyramid. And typically there are three levels of management in an organization that we talked about a few minutes ago. Top management, these are the CEO, the president, chief operating officer, chief information officer. These are the people at the top of the organization that have been appointed by the board of directors, and they are responsible for the strategic planning, setting the longer term goals, the vision, the mission statement, etc., and defining the corporate culture within the organization. The second level of management is called middle management, and these are the managers who design and carry out this tactical plans that we talked about a few minutes ago in the various departments or various areas of the company. And the third level of management are the frontline or operational managers, or sometimes called supervisory managers, and they're really responsible for designing and carrying out the operational plans for the daily activities of the company. So these might be the line supervisors, the foreman, and that sort of thing in the organization. Leading is really the third key function of management, and it's really the process of guiding and motivating others to ensure that the goals of the organization are being met. So managers are responsible for directing employees, on a daily basis, as those employees carry out their plan and their work within the company. As we've seen, organizations need strong, effective leadership at all levels of the organization to ensure that the goals are being met and that they can become competitive. So when we talk about leadership or leaders, leaders obtain their sources of power and their ability to affect the behaviors and the actions of others in from five different sources. The first is a legitimate source of power, and that's really derived from their position in the organization. So, given their status or given their title, they obviously receive some legitimate power. The second is reward power. So the manager or is the one that has the ability to reward employees, perhaps reward them in terms of performance or bonuses, salaries, and that sort of thing. So managers typically have a source of power simply because they have the ability to reward employees. And on the other side, managers have the power to be coercive, and which is the ability to threaten negative outcomes. They have the ability to fire or affect an employee's salary or bonuses and that sort of thing. So managers get a source of power from the ability to use threats, if you want, in an organization. Managers also get a source of power because sometimes they're deemed to be the expert. They have extensive knowledge in the organization. Perhaps they see how the behaviors or the actions of employees affect the company as a whole, and are being able to articulate that to employees. So they, based on their knowledge and skill set, they gain a source of power within an organization. And the last is something called referent power, which is derived from their personal charisma and the respect and admiration that they inspire from their employees. And so there are various sources of powers, and a good leader uses all the sources of power effectively to motivate and guide their employees to ensure that the organizational goals are being met. Individuals in leadership positions tend to be relatively consistent how they attempt to influence the behavior of others, meaning that each individual has a tendency to react to people and situations in a very particular way. And this pattern of behavior is referred to as a leadership style. And there's three primary forms of leadership style. So let's take a look at each of those leadership styles. The first is something that's called an autocratic leader. And these autocratic leaders are very directive leaders. They allow for very little input from their subordinates. They tend to prefer to make decisions and solve problems on their own without a lot of input from their subordinates. And they expect their subordinates to implement those solutions according to some very specific and detailed instructions. Communication typically is one way from the leader to the employee. And sometimes when an autocratic leader treats employees with fairness and respect, they may be considered as knowledgeable and very decisive, but sometimes autocratic leaders can be perceived as being very narrow-minded, heavy-handed in their unwillingness to share, the power and the information that they have. Today, the trend in organizations is away from this directive, controlling style of the autocratic leader. This approach is sometimes best, or the best example is in the military. And sometimes when a production line, factory workers have very little perhaps knowledge or low skill sets, an autocratic leadership style might be more appropriate. Sometimes an autocratic leadership style is important in times of crisis when a manager needs to take control and get things done. Canadian businesses are really looking for more and more of a participative leadership style, which is the second type of leadership style, meaning leaders share decision making with the group members, and they really encourage discussion of the issues and the alternatives to come up with solutions. So, for instance, they might seek the input from frontline workers in a factory setting or along assembly lines to find ways to improve the quality or to improve the safety or improve the efficiency of the process. And the goal really is to create an organization where workers are passionately involved in their work, and they want to. And these leaders seek the input from their employees. There are three different types of participative leadership styles. One is called a democratic leader, and a democratic leader solicits the input from the members of the group, and then allows the group members to make the final decision through some sort of a voting process. And this works really well when we have educated or highly trained professionals, and allowing them to find the solution. Consensual leaders encourage discussion about the issues and require all the parties to agree to a final decision, and that's used when a consensus really is necessary. Consultative leaders, though, still a participative leadership style, so they will confer with their subordinates before making a decision, but the consultative leader will take the input from the subordinates, but retain the final decision-making authority. And sometimes this technique has been used to increase productivity in organizations. So the preferred approach is for businesses is certainly moving away from an autocratic leadership style to more of a participative leadership style. The third leadership style is at the opposite end of the continuum from the autocratic style. It's really called free rein or laissez-faire leadership style. And basically, managers who use a laissez-faire leadership style really turn over all authority and control to the subordinates. So they may define the ultimate goal and then allow the employees the free rein on how to best accomplish it. The manager may act more as a consultant or coach to assist the employees. Under the free rein leadership style, subordinates really have unlimited freedom as long as they stay within the confines as dictated by the company's policies. Sometimes free rein leadership is done in high-tech labs or in the medical field, or in colleges and universities, where there's a lot of discretion and authority and accountability passed on to the subordinates. Some of the drawbacks of a free rein leadership style is that if the expectations are unclear and the manager doesn't give a lot of feedback, employees can get very frustrated and feel that they don't have a lot of guidance. And sometimes they may perceive the leader as being uninvolved or indifferent to what is going on in the work team or the work unit. Important to keep in mind that there's not one best form of leadership style. The most effective style for a given situation really depends on the characteristics of the subordinates, their training, their skill sets, the complexity of the task, and the source of the leader's power and stability of the environment. For instance, a participative leader in times of crisis or emergency might have to switch to an autocratic style. So good leaders are able to adopt their leadership style depending on the situation at hand in an organization. So as we take a look at the three leadership styles, going from the autocratic to the free rein, the amount of authority held by the leader is very strong at the autocratic style of leadership, and lesser so at the free rein. And of course, the opposite in terms of the authority that's held by the group member. It increases as we go from left to right. Both participative and free rein leaders use this technique called empowerment to share decision-making authority with their subordinates. And really, empowerment means giving employees increased autonomy and discretion to make their own decisions, as well giving them the authority to control the resources that are going to be required to implement those decisions. So when decision-making power is shared, employees really do feel a greater sense of ownership and responsibility for the outcomes of their own work or the outcomes of the team's work. The leadership style of managers in any organization really is indicative of the underlying philosophy or values of the organization. And that set of attitudes, values, standards of behaviors that an organization has is something that's called the corporate culture. And the corporate culture in any business certainly evolves over time and is based, evolves with the history of the organization and includes the vision of the top leaders of the organization. Although the culture is really intangible and often rules are unspoken, it can really have a strong impact on the company's success and really create a competitive advantage within the corporate culture. For instance, Porter Airlines, a small airline in Ontario, working out of Toronto, really seeks to empower employees to give. They have a corporate culture where employees are empowered to make decisions and ensure the happiness of their customers. And so they've created a corporate culture of giving training and empowering their employees to ensure customers are happy. The fourth key functions or function that managers perform is something that's called controlling. Controlling is the process of assessing the company's progress towards accomplishing its goals. And there's really 5 main steps in the control process. The first, of course, is to set the performance standards and goals, and making sure that those goals are very smart, so very specific, very measurable, very attainable, realistic, and relevant to the objectives of the organization, and have an element of time attached to them. So setting these performance standards and goals is the first step in the control process, as well as making sure that they are clearly understood by all employees. The second step is to measure performance regularly against the standards that have been set, and then compare the actual performance to those performance standards. And once we understand where some gaps might be happening, either positive or negative, we may need to either, if they're positive gaps and we're doing better than we expected, encouraging those behaviors and coaching to ensure that that continues, understanding why, or we may need to take some sort of corrective action by coaching our employees or understanding the goals. Or understanding the behaviors that are resulting in the negative performance. And the fifth step is using that information to set up future performance standards, use it to perhaps adjust or amend some of the standards and goals and targets that are being set. And this is an ongoing process. It continues over and over at regular intervals, and allows managers to understand things that if we are attaining the goals of the organization. So it's a critical step in in all organizations. So in carrying out the responsibilities of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, managers will tend to take on many different roles in an organization. And a role really is a set of behaviors or set of activities that the manager is expected to perform. And these managerial roles fall into 3 primary categories: informational roles, interpersonal roles, and decisional roles. So these roles are summarized in this chart. For instance, in an informational role, the manager might act as an information gatherer. They might distribute that information to various departments or various employees within the organization, or act as a spokesperson by representing the company to shareholders or outside groups. The second is an interpersonal type of role where a manager might have to act as a figurehead, so representing the company in some sort of symbolic way. We've often seen that on TV at ribbon cutting ceremonies and that sort of thing, representation of the company. Certainly a leadership role, helping subordinates to achieve the goals of the organization, as well as a liaison type of role where they manage activities between the different departments or different functions within an organization. And the third type of roles that leaders often take are decisional type of roles. So that may mean more of an entrepreneurial role where they're seeking out new possibilities, new products, new changes, new production processes in an organization. They may take on a disturbance handler role when handling unexpected events, crises, fires, and that sort of thing. They may take on a resource allocating role to allocate the all resources, financial resources, human resources within the organization. Or they may take on a negotiator type of role in the negotiating process, which might be, for instance, negotiating salaries with union representatives. So there's many roles that the managers will undertake in an organization while completing its four functions of planning, leading, organizing and controlling. So in every function that the manager performs or any role that they take on, the manager really is a decision maker. And in business, there's managers will follow a five-step process in the decision-making process, and you do this all the time when making a decision. So it's really no different from the decisions that you might make. First step is to understand the problem, recognize the opportunity. So having a clear understanding of the problem, getting to the root cause of the problem is the first step in making a decision. For instance, you might identify a personal issue, meaning that you need to get to university on time. So the problem is, how do I get to university in a reliable, time-effective, perhaps cost-effective way? The second step in the decision-making process is identifying possible solutions or alternatives that might satisfy the problem. So in your situation of getting to university, one might be to take the bus. A possible solution might be to purchase a vehicle, and the third solution might be to walk. The third part of the decision-making process is to define evaluation criteria and select one or more of those alternatives. So in your decision making process about getting to university, perhaps the criteria might be it has to be low cost and but a reliable source of transportation that will get you to university on time. So you may decide based on the evaluation criteria that taking the bus is the most cost-effective, reliable source of transportation to get to the university. So you take on then make the decision to take the bus, put the plan into action, and actually start taking the bus. But a critical component is the last step, and that's checking the plan or checking the decision to make sure it was effective, that it did solve the problem and it met the decision-making criteria. For instance, you might find that taking the bus is cold, it takes more time, and it doesn't allow you to the freedom that you were expecting, and so you might have to go back and redefine the problem and look at other options and alternatives. So managers, just like you and me, go through a very similar decision-making process in making decisions for the company or the organization. To be successful in the planning, leading, organizing, and controlling functions, managers must use a wide variety of skills. And really, a skill is just the ability to do something very proficiently. There are really three primary types of skills that managers will have. The first are highly technical skills. Those are very specialized areas of knowledge and expertise. Uh, Perhaps it's preparing financial statements, programming computer, knowing the job of a frontline supervisors, knowing how to write a business letter. So very defined technical skills. The second level of skills are human relation skills, and these are the interpersonal skills that managers use to accomplish the goals through the effective use of the human resources that are available in the company, giving positive feedback, coaching, and guiding our employees in ensuring the success of our organization. And the third set of skills are conceptual skills. So that's the ability to view the organization as a whole, understand how decisions in one area or one level of the organization might affect other departments, other areas in the company, or how they might contribute or not contribute to the organizational's long-term strategic direction and goals. There is a new managerial skill that is often cited, and that's the global management skills as businesses seek to expand into areas outside of Canada. It's also important that managers in those situations are able to manage globally, so operate in diverse cultural environments is a new a skill that managers might need when doing business in the international marketplace, like we talked about in Chapter 5. And of course, these type of skills will vary, or the importance of those skill sets will vary at different levels of the organization. For instance, top management needs very high conceptual skills and human skills, but they don't need the technical skills that supervisory management or front management need. They don't need to know how to make the widget, or how to program the computer, or how to record a transaction in the financial statements. But they need to have the strong conceptual and human relationship management skills. Middle management needs some strong human resource management skills, but still have fairly strong technical and conceptual skills, versus supervisory or frontline managers really need to have very high technical skills, understand the very precise technical requirements of all their of the skill of the jobs that their employees are doing. As well, they must have strong human resource management skills. But less supervisory management or lower levels of management don't need the same level of conceptual skills that our top management does in the organization. So depending on where what level of management you are in the organization will require different skill sets. So as management continues to evolve into the future, we're finding managers need to expand their skill sets, or some of these things will become more important. For instance, more important to be able to handle crisis, so the 9/11 crisis, natural disasters, floods, hurricanes, and that sort of thing. So managers are needing to spend more time in having some good crisis management skills going forward. With the increasing availability of informational technology, managers must really need to learn how to manage the amount of information. Managers get bombarded with information, and it's really important to understand that being able to classify and simplify that information to turn it into a format that you can actually make decisions from. So the ability to dashboard, take a look at all that information and focus on some key metrics in a very concise, clear way, and share that information that is easily understood in the organization is becoming more and more of a challenge for managers and organizations. And of course, as we expand globally, as our employee base becomes more diverse, managers need to have more and more skills in managing those various or diverse cultural environments, whether it be managing a diverse workforce or managing across territorial boundaries and into foreign countries. So the ability to manage in those diverse environments is becoming more and more important for all managers today. Another skill is today you may experience or as an employee or as a manager that we get bombarded with a number of tasks that we need to do. So being able to have some effective time management techniques and being able to establish priorities is becoming an important skill for all managers, and the ability to learn to say no, the ability to focus and stay on task and set deadlines and ensure that deadlines are being met, time blocking and that sort of thing. So effective time management skills are becoming more and more important for management, as well as the ability to manage the level of stress. Often managers we see tend towards burnout, and one way of dealing with that burnout is the ability to manage stress so that it doesn't start to cause health and related problems. So you'll see that as a manager, you'll need to find ways to manage that level of stress. So that concludes the information on Chapter 9. And Chapter 10 will take a look at your organizational function of managers in more depth.